another episode of Unlocking California Politics. Today we are thrilled to be joined by Phil Hawkins Jr., who is C.A.R.'s new CEO. Phil was appointed as CEO this past September, bringing with him over 25 years of experience in the real estate industry. Before coming to C.A.R., Phil led the Pacific West Association of Realtors as CEO since 2015, where he championed realtor interests at every level. He's been deeply involved with C.A.R. throughout his career, serving on numerous committees, and has been recognized nationally as an RPAC Hall of Fame member. He's also been very involved with NAR as well, our national association. Today, we are looking forward to our conversation with Phil as he has just begun, since we're already a couple of months into his tenure, but into his recent tenure as CEO of C.A.R. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you. You said new. That was a conversation I just had with somebody not too long ago. How long can you use the word new in front of it? Is it months? Is it years? Is it weeks? Yeah, that's up for discussion.
Yeah, so I think recent might be better than new at this point. So because it's been, I'm sure, a very intense couple of months since you've come on board. So Phil, you've had a long career with organized real estate. How did you first get involved with the realtor organization?
So I'm probably going to go back farther than I should, but this goes all the way back to high school. I was in high school. It was 1988, and at the time, I think my father was trying to find me a job to keep me out of trouble. Looking back, I think that was the case, and he was a realtor all his life. And a friend of his was a supporter of a local assemblyman. Mm-hmm. And the job he got me over the summer, which led until November, was working for this local assemblyman, who was also a realtor, by the way. And so in 1988, I got my first taste of working on a campaign. And for those of you that's ever done that before, you get the bug. In fact, everybody I know that's participated in something like this has got the bug. So fast forward a few years later, I've worked in a number of campaigns. It was in, I'm trying to think the year, it was in 1996, November of 96, I worked my last campaign. We lost in November. And I ran into a friend who worked for the Realtor Association that was a supporter of the candidate I was working for. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm going to wait till after the first of the year. Nobody's really hiring at this point, and look for a job." And he said, "The Realtor Association's hiring. You should apply there." And he sent me the application, and I got hired in March of 1997, and I've been here ever since.
And in March, so that's it with PacWest?
No, I first started at the South Bay Association of Realtors.
Oh, okay.
I worked there for 1 year and then moved over to the Pacific West. They're neighboring associations. One located in Torrance, the other one's located in Orange County, but covers the Long Beach area as part of the LA County area as well.
Okay, so you've been now part of the organization for over 25 years.
Yes.
Some of your favorite memories as being a part of this industry?
You know, when you say that question, there's so many, but what always sticks out, and it's year after year, and this sounds like I'm pushing this idea, but our ledge days in Sacramento every year just gives me enthusiasm. This gives me great hope for everything that we do. If for realtors listening to this, if you ever show up to one of our legislative days, they really are what brings us together and puts us behind issues to move forward. So working at a local association, we always brought new members up for legislative day. Not a lot, because we're farther away, but we'd always bring, say, 5 members, 8 members, and every one of them, every year, that would get them involved in our association and want to move forward and then move up the chain of our association. Just because legislative is so powerful, when you have what do we have, about 800,000 people,
right.
1,200 people in the room, and we're all speaking together on the issue. Because this affects housing and homeownership. And it's just so moving to see all the people so excited about the issue. And so it's every legislative day. And I've always enjoyed the Sacramento legislative days even more than the Washington, D.C. ones. I don't know why. I just always have. Going back from my early days, there's something magical that happens here on legislative day for the realtors.
Well, facetiously, I always tell our people who work on federal issues, that's because things actually happen in California. So you actually see tangible results to your actions. And I agree with you. Ledge Day is always kind of a very special day. And although it wouldn't matter in a sense whether we're effective or not on that particular day, because it's really the presence and the lobbying for our issues. We've actually also had, I think, the last 3 legislative days, we've been extraordinarily effective on the particular issues that we were identified as hot issues in making sure that those went the way that we felt that they should go. So those have also been extraordinarily effective days as well.
And realtors, they're so personable. They, for the most part, a lot of them know their elected officials.
Correct.
Because they're very involved in the community. So, and I've been in offices before where I didn't know the elected official very well, but there was 2, 3, 4, 5 realtors in the office that were having meals with the legislator, that knew their kids go to school together. So, it always is very awesome to see how realtors are involved in their communities and have those relationships already built.
Yeah, and I think that's something you really hit on, is in terms of relationship building, just by the nature of what the realtors do, our members do, tends to make them people, and are often able to persuade and to at least engage and build relationships. It's probably the very rare realtor who's a hostile, angry person who is successful as a realtor.
And if you think about it, for them to be successful in their career, they have to be very personal people.
Right.
They have to able to build relationships, and it just carries over when it comes to talking to elected officials about our issues.
Correct. So advocating for policies as well as politicians that support homeownership, private property rights, and other priorities of our realtor organization is obviously a big part of what we do. Realtor organization, our members should all know this, but now we have 3 levels: the local associations, the state association, as well as our national association. And you are fortunate enough to have been involved very actively on all 3 levels: local, state, and on the federal level. So I'm going to start with the local side of what we do. What do you think are the most effective ways for our members to advocate for priorities on the local level, which are really something we're seeing more and more as vital, because the ideas are bubble up, basically, good or bad, bubble up from the local side?
I always felt if our issue got to a city council level where it was up for debate, we're not going to be very successful. You want to have those relationships with these elected officials, with these city council people, with these county supervisors prior to walking in an office and not already having that relationship where they at least know us or at least trust us as an expert in the housing field, is going to really hurt you when it comes to lobbying for this issue. The first thing I would do is start building those relationships. Realtors already know how to build relationships. So building the relationships with the elected officials. And I guarantee you, we have 5 to 10 to 20 realtors that know that elected official in a very personal way, one way or another. And so it's getting the right people in the room, and it's getting the people that the elected official trusts, because again, they've had this relationship prior to being elected or prior to the office that they currently have. So as somebody starting out, I would get involved, and it might start at the city level. It might start, volunteering for a commission, serving for one of the committees that, say, the city has, or it might be a social club, or it might be a chamber of commerce. But get involved, and once you're involved, you're going to start meeting people, and you're going to expand your networking. And at that point, you can start talking about our issues because you're building those relationships. And again, I would not assume that people know how a real estate transaction happens. I wouldn't assume that they know, the ins and outs of some of our issues. I think a lot of times we think people automatically already know these things, and they don't.
Now, on the state level, we face many challenges with the legislature, which I think is sympathetic to our overall goals, but often pursue policies which are at odds with one another. So, for example, we've had recent success with down payment assistance with the California Dream for All program. But then the legislature might propose implementing transfer taxes, which might simultaneously make it more difficult to actually utilize that down payment assistance. So that goes to what you were just saying about people not necessarily understanding the transaction and how that works. And that is something which we have to do also on the state level almost all the time. So what do you think our members can do to help their legislators understand our priorities are the priorities of Californians, that regardless of political party, I mean, talk a lot about being, the Realtor Party of California, bipartisan group, mainly because our issues, again, cut across party lines. Everybody, frankly, wants to own a home. So how do you think that we can help get those priorities across and make it clear that this is something that benefits all Californians?
And first, when you mentioned it's not a blue or red issue, it really isn't. I don't think any of us speak differently to a Republican versus a Democrat when it comes to
Right.
our issues. We're saying the same message because it's not a blue or red issue. As I mentioned in the local, talking to a local elected official, and not assuming they know, I have a story, which I won't say this legislator's name, and you might have heard this story just recently, a couple months ago. I was speaking to a senator up here, and he was asking what are the issues that we're facing when it comes to real estate. And we talk about supply. We're talking about interest rates where they are. We're talking of a number of things. We're talking about taxes. And when we're talking about taxes, he said, "But what do you mean about taxes? If they sell their home and buy another one, they don't have to pay any taxes, correct?" And this was a very smart senator. I know he knows a lot of stuff about different industries, but he didn't know that if you sell your house and you exceed the capital gains, you're going to pay taxes on that. And so I had to explain that to him. Again, it's going back to we assume they knew this and they didn't. So I think the message that I think all of us should take out of this is that we have to assume that our elected officials don't completely understand our industry, and we have to explain it to them going back from the very beginning, because this person thought if they sold the home and bought another one within a certain amount of time, they wouldn't pay any taxes. Now, that's a 1031 exchange where that's not a single family
Right.
residential home, but he was confusing them and putting them together. So I think one of our jobs that we need to spend more time with is educating our elected officials, whether it's at the local, the state, or the national, on how a transaction happens and why it happens and the pitfalls of the transaction.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because often when we have ideas that come out of the legislature that could have adverse impacts on the transaction, just in terms of maybe making it more onerous, creating new hurdles, making it harder for, especially for home buyers to buy a home, the legislators are often like, oh, okay, then let's see, how can we
Mhm.
take care of those concerns that you have? It's not, I think it is, I don't think it's necessarily done out of like, yeah, we've got
Correct.
to
I agree.
make that transaction more difficult for people.
Agreed.
It's genuinely like, oh, I didn't see that potential effect. And
Mhm.
we are often able to then work with them to solve those problems.
And I don't believe there is one magical bill that's going to fix all this either. California is such a large state, and we're going to have multiple ways of tackling the housing issue throughout the state.
Right.
So it's. I wish there was one thing that we say we do this and everything's fixed. There's not, and so I think we're going to see multiple tries at trying to fix the housing industry, and hopefully everyone helps a little bit, and ultimately you add them together, and it helps a lot.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you don't even realize what is the bill that's going to be
hmm
the one that actually that helps move things along.
hmm
I was recently last year at a conference in San Luis Obispo, and everybody was talking about the name of the bills is the number of the bills escaping me. It was a Senator Skinner bill, which streamlines the approval process, and
hmm
everybody was like, "Oh,
This will fix
this
it.
is helping. This is really helping
Yeah.
us." And I actually spoke to the Chamber of Commerce person there. I said, this is so encouraging.
hmm
Hearing the developers, this is really optimistic. The laws are working." She goes, "Look, a year or two ago, they would have been just as pessimistic. It sometimes takes a while for people to realize how they can use the laws." And I was
Yep.
like, "Oh, that's a good point." So sometimes you don't realize which bills are going to be the ones that actually end up moving the needle.
But yeah.
Now, the federal government is going through a period of significant flux, and there's going to be a number of tax issues to be considered that affect Californians, such as SALT and capital gains. Have you talked to your NAR counterparts, maybe your own views about what does it look like for the coming year?
So recently, I was at our National Association meetings, and I did sit down with our head lobbyist at the National Association of Realtors. And in speaking with her, we really focused on three items. A fourth one I'll mention, because we will have a tax bill next year, and what that's going to look like.
Right.
Last tax bill was 2017.
Hmm.
So the issues we spoke about and what they're going to be pushing in the new tax bill is number one, the SALT. Currently it's capped at $10,000, and that really hurts a number of high cost states, California being maybe the most, but California being one of them. And that goes to the deduction that you can write off in your taxes for paying your local taxes. So that's going to be addressed. Uh, Currently, like I said, it's at 10,000. They're hoping for a minimum of doubling it, but there may be some instances where it actually might get a little bit higher than that too. So that being number one, and that's one of the things our national association is looking at. Number two, and probably the more exciting one, is capital gains. So our current system with capital gains is if you're single and sell your house up to 250,000, you don't have to pay taxes of the profit, and then you have to pay taxes on anything over that. If you're married, it's 500,000. That was passed in 1997. That was the year I got into the real estate industry. So over 25 years ago, it hasn't been indexed. Nothing's changed since 1997. And I would argue that anything that has a dollar amount that passed over 25 years ago and doesn't change for indexing is probably not where it should be. I recently saw a article that our National Association of Realtors did, and if it was simply put to inflation, it'd be close to double. I want to say that 500,000 went to like 993, or it was close to double. And so I know they're going to be lobbying for that. And then whatever they get, hopefully they can double it, but then it's indexed going forward. I think that's the key. So it does change with inflation. So those are the two that they're really going to be pushing. One disappointment that we talked about, and I'll tell you why, was mortgage interest deduction. In 2017, when the tax bill passed, what they did prior to 17, you had up to $1 million in what you can deduct annually on a loan. Say your house has $1 million loan, you can deduct the interest annually on your taxes. Anything over $1 million, you couldn't. In 2017, when that passed, it went to $750,000 for buying a new home. Now the other ones are grandfathered, which helped, but going forward, it's $750,000. Now, unfortunately, that's probably good in about 40 of the 50 states.
Right.
So California, that doesn't work too well, and a number of other states doesn't work too well. But because that is successful in a number of states, she didn't think there's going to be much movement on that, just because there is a limited amount of money where things are going to be coming from. So hopefully, I'd still love to see that go back to $1 million, but that's one of the things that she didn't think we're going to see much movement on.
You mentioned the capital gains changes, which would be great, especially for Californians, New Jersey, New York. And I heard one of and I believe it was introduced by Congressman Panetta from California, that this is often perceived as a blue state problem. Has that expanded? Because I've heard, now that Texas they have very high property taxes, they're starting to be affected. Is that part of why there's or just the anti-tax feeling in Washington? Basically, what are the factors that might make that more likely to get through?
So I think it is becoming more of a problem in more states, but I also think people are realizing that we're not seeing transactions. People aren't turning over. I remember when I started with the realtors, and for a number of years, I could always use a number, and it fluctuated, but I could always use a number that people generally sold their house for about 7 years.
Right.
Sometimes it was 6, sometimes it was 8 or 9, but about 7 years was that average for a long time. Well, that has changed. I think do you know this? I think it's up to 13 or 14 years.
No, it's well
very
over high, especially
double
in California,
and it's going up.
Right.
So there's a reason people aren't turning over their homes, and one of the big reasons is the taxes they have to pay. I think we all know those people that's been in their home for over 20 or 30 years, that paid a few $100,000 for it way back when, and just appreciation, it has gone more than the capital gains allows. And so it just doesn't make sense to sell the house because all the taxes they're going to have to pay.
Right.
And I think that happens just not in California. You're seeing that in a number of other states. And some of the states you might not even realize you're seeing that, because the housing issue that we're seeing in California, they're experiencing it throughout all the other states. It might not be on the same level, and in other states it is, but it might not be on the same level in every state, but every state is seeing a housing issue. So if you're maybe in a Midwest state that you did pay $100,000 or $200,000 for the house, that house could be worth $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 now. It doesn't pencil to sell the house because of the taxes you're going to have to pay. So I think there's movement, like you said. Other states are seeing that, this could be an issue for us as well. So more states are getting on that bandwagon.
Right, and that we first saw that, at least from what we were observing in Texas. We actually had a call from the Texas Association because for the first time, their property taxes were
Hmm.
suddenly going up quite high, way above the cap. Same with Florida, a number
Hmm.
of states, sort of deeper red states are starting to encounter the same issues.
So I think if we're able to get even those two things, I'd love to get more on that. But those two things, I think you might see, and I'm hopeful that you're going to see more transactions starting to happen because it does make sense now. Now we have to, and you probably have a question later on, but have to look at supply. If a person lives in that 5-bedroom, 3-bath house, and now they're empty nesters, you know, and they want to downsize, where can they go? And so that's going to probably be our next issue we're going to have to battle if we get this one through.
You know, and what you said about California problems sort of stretching across the country. For a while, there was a point where I thought, it always used to be so goes California, so goes the rest of the country.
Mm.
For a while, it's like, are we just now the outliers? And it's like, oh no,
Yeah,
no,
no.
no. All the problems we had here are now spreading
Yep.
rapidly across the country. Partly because of Californians spreading rapidly
Mhm.
across the country, but they are going across the whole country. In one of the last podcasts we held, we discussed how both conservative and progressive economists, from the late Milton Friedman to Krugman from the New York Times, have universally panned rent control. Yet it continues to come back as a policy idea, both by on the state level. We've had, we just fought our third initiative to stop the repeal of the Costa-Hawkins law. And so it keeps appearing both on the state and local level. And now all our members may know that your father was the Hawkins of the Costa-Hawkins rent law, which prevents the imposition of the kind of extreme rent control that would devastate housing. What do you think are the best ways to try to get it across, frankly, to politicians that rent control is not the way to go? And I mention that because we've just seen a resounding defeat of Proposition 33, which would have undone Costa-Hawkins. Every county, including what counties which are perceived as very liberal, such as San Francisco or Alameda, voted resoundingly no. How do you think we get that message across?
I think we have to relate it to a non-housing issue. To say, you want to control the price of housing. How come we're not controlling other things? And because it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
We live in a capitalist economy, so we're not looking to control prices. We're let the market set prices. Now, I would argue that the reason we're having these conversations is because we're not building. When we don't have the supply, uh, people want to constrain what we currently have. So when anybody talks to me about rent control, and especially when they're trying to talk about the benefits of rent control, I always go back to them and say, would this be a problem if we had supply? And almost everybody would say, no,
Mhm.
it wouldn't be a problem. So I try to focus them. Let's figure out how to get more supply, because by constraining the cost of something, it doesn't work. It's never worked. Look at any industry; it just doesn't work. So let's talk about supply. And if you think about the municipalities that do have some types of rent control, generally they're not building.
Right.
They just don't build. So if you're not building, you are going to have these pressures to help with what costs are going to be. And anything that you have a finite amount of is going to cost more. So let's figure out how we can build more. And once we can build more, we have those options for people. And we should have that leveling off of what makes sense for people to find homes. And we need to look at a lot of different options. Um, Maybe there's smaller options we can look at. For a while there, and you're not hearing much talk about it
You're
anymore,
right.
but you had the tiny home talk.
Mhm.
I'm not hearing a whole lot of that anymore, but that's kind of a cool concept. I know some
Right.
some communities that did that. And another option that I think we're going to see a lot more of is some manufactured housing. And manufactured housing, I don't know if you've seen it lately. It's
Mhm.
not the double wides that we originally were thinking.
Right.
These are beautiful homes, and they're just able to manufacture a house in a cost-effective way that would be less expensive. And so there's other opportunities out there that we can look at to help move the needle and get more supply. In some areas, density makes complete sense. Other areas, I'd argue it doesn't. So we got to figure out those areas where we can put some denser type units in. And I want to go back to, because some of the communities that I was involved with, especially on a local level, they would do a lot for providing homes, but not for sale units. So they'd be
Right.
apartment units.
Right.
And we want to get people into buying a home, into owning a home. Ultimately, that's how you have generational wealth. And that's the goal as a realtor organization. We need to get people into homes. And there's studies after studies of all the benefits when you own a home, your involvement in the community. I mean, even going down to your kids' test scores in schools. I mean,
Right.
it's all, there's a lot of different reasons why that's so important. So ultimately, and when I talk to local elected officials, when they're talking about, say, a piece of parcel and what can go there, I always talk to them about, let's figure out how that can be home ownership. Condos, townhomes, some density units where you can buy them and own them. So
Right.
I think we need to make sure we're having that conversation and just not providing a home that could be a apartment type dwelling. We need to figure out how to get people into ownership.
Oh yeah, no, that's absolutely been our priority within the legislature, and actually, I will say that a lot of our legislators are very sympathetic to that aspect, especially, um, we have, as you know, a very diverse state, and we have a number of legislators ago. If my parents had not bought that home,
Hmm.
a lot of the stability that I took for granted in my life would not have occurred.
Hmm.
There's a great deal of, I think, resonance as far as the home ownership message. So that's a very high priority for us, in the legislature, and we also have a concern about, again, the use of government funds at times to sometimes acquire those and convert them to non-ownership opportunities, which we think is a real problem.
I
Um,
just on that same subject. I'm told the story from my grandfather when he moved out here. He was in Missouri, and after World War II, he moved out to California, actually Compton, California, and bought a mobile home unit. So he owned it, and I laughed at him when he told me the story. He added a room on. I'd say, how do you
mhm,
add a room on to a mobile home unit? Anyway, he added a room on, but that was his. That was how my grandmother and grandfather got into home ownership, and then moved up from there.
right.
But it's getting people into the game. When I talked to years ago, when I was talking to my friends, and we're all about that age where we had jobs and we're trying to buy homes. And some of them said, you know what, I'm going to live where I want to live. And if I'm renting the rest of my life, I'm going to rent the rest of my. And I explained to them, the advantages, and most of them got it. I wouldn't say they always listened, but most of them got it. But you got to get your foot in the game, and then once you're in the game, meaning home ownership, then you can look at whether you're going to stay there, you're going to move up, you're going to move down. But you got to get your foot in the game.
No, yeah, and I think one of the problems in ours, people who listen to this podcast have heard me vent about sometimes certain, I think, parts of the state like San Francisco, et cetera, often have a disproportionate effect on our discourse in the legislature and in California, because the problems that are often unique to them are not applicable to the rest of the state. So, for example, in Southern California or even the Central Valley, you still have a lot of home ownership opportunities.
Mhm.
A lot of home ownership opportunities for working and middle class people. These are not some impossible dreams. These are very doable, and they've enhanced people's lives, working and middle class people's lives so significantly. It's not a lost dream, and I think that's something which we always have to reiterate: is that no, this is very viable and it's changing people's lives.
Yeah, I get
So.
asked occasionally, what's one of your biggest fears? And one of my biggest fears is, there's parts of Europe that to own a home, you have to wait to your parents
Hmm.
pass and give you the home from there, and then you keep it until you give it to your kids. That home ownership is the American dream in the United States, and we need to keep it that way.
Right.
Where if you want to buy a home, if you're able to buy a home, there should be opportunities for you to buy a home.
Right. For a while, my solution was the state of California should encourage more hybrid work, so we could build
Mhm.
more housing where housing can be built, and try to work it that way, since we have such challenges sometimes building properties, building homes
But I
in the
think that
high
that's
job
one of those
areas.
areas where I think we did see a little bit.
Correct.
Like I said, when I don't think there's one piece of legislation that's going to fix everything, but hybrid work fixed a little bit.
Right.
People can live now. arguably, I'm not seeing it in traffic. You would think I'd see a little less traffic. I'm not seeing a little less traffic, but I know a number of my friends that work hybrid that never worked hybrid, 5, 6 years ago.
Right. And in the Sacramento area, we're seeing a number of people from the Bay Area who may have to just go in 2 days a week
Mhm.
and so have elected to move to what is a significantly more affordable area.
Yep.
The state legislature was just sworn in, and the new legislative session will begin in January with over 30 new legislators. What do you think we need to be vigilant about watching for in the coming year?
Well, if I could, 30 legislators, hopefully we've already had those relationships at a local level. I would assume most of them are coming from some kind of local elected
Correct.
office. So hopefully that local realtor, that local associations already started educating that person, building that relationship with that person. Because unfortunately, when people are first elected, there's some ideas that when you're just mulling around in your head, think they're great ideas until everything's thought through. So I think we need to now reach out to those 30 and start talking to them about our issues. Again, hopefully they have that base because they're coming from, say, a local elected office, but we need to make sure they're educated on our housing issues.
So 2025 will be our 120th anniversary of the California Association of Realtors. Um, we've had a lot of change in a very short period of time. What kind of changes do you envision happening to the industry as we move forward?
So I think first we're going to see the challenges we already talked about. The supply, the interest rates is it's something that we can't control. But it truly affects our industry. What interest rates are at the time. Um, I think our forecast for our economist for C.A.R. We're looking at a few more transactions happening in 2025
Right.
than 2024. And to go out even a little bit farther, which is, it's more of a guess the farther you go out. But I think we are on a path to see a few more transactions every year for the next few years. Now, saying that, our population growth is exceeding what the number of transactions
Right.
that we need. So we do need to figure out those supply issues. So next year and years after that, there's just going to be a challenge on trying to figure out how we get supply for the people that live in California. And we joke that it's 120 years that we've been organized real estate. I joke and say I think we have a few members from day one because when realtors get involved in the association, they tend to stay involved
Oh, yeah.
in a great way because they have that knowledge, they have that experience. But just going back to next year, I think we need to focus on educating our legislators and also figuring out ways where we can add supply ultimately to get people in homeownership.
Thanks, Phil. One thing our members do often like to hear about, especially for someone like yourself who's a strong leader, what are lessons from your career that have influenced your leadership style?
Good question. So going through the first thing that pops in my head is going through the 2008, 2009, 2010,
Right.
housing and issues that we had those years. Those were really tough years. Not only for the real estate industry, but for a lot of industries. And it's just a good reminder that not to get too far ahead of yourself. Make sure you stay focused. I always and I learned especially from those years that when things get difficult, when things change, when things are not as expected, go back to your basics. Go back to what got you there in the first place. Go back if you're realtors, go back to farming your areas or communicating with your clients. In working for the association, go back to those educating our members, educating the public. I think what I learned from those years and what I always remember is you got to have a good foundation to do anything, and because if you don't, things get a little squirrely going forward. So go back to those basics, go back to your foundation, and that just helps you move forward.
Great. I'm also I'm privy to see your calendar, your work calendar, and so I'm not going to ask you about work-life balance because maybe you'll get that in a couple of years or something. But when you are able to slow down a little, what are the kind of things you like to do to try to, I guess, outside of the work area?
So my family is very close. I have 3 kids, with my oldest being married. So arguably, I have 4 kids. We tend to travel together, and I don't think it's only because I pay for it. I think they actually want to travel with us. That's arguable though. And then my youngest is still in high school. He's a senior in high school, plays basketball. I have about 6 more weeks of watching him play basketball until basketball
Great.
season's over. So I'm going to enjoy these next 6 weeks. So I have my youngest is 18, senior in high school. I have my middle one. She's in college. She's a sophomore in college. She was playing water polo for the school, but they recently dropped the program, so she's not
that's too
playing
bad.
water polo anymore. And then my oldest graduated, and recently, 18 months ago, got married, and so we have an addition to our family. So the 4 of us, we enjoy being together. We enjoy traveling together. We took a trip just before I was hired at C.A.R. We spent 3 weeks in Europe. It was actually my first time being in Europe, and we just had a blast. It was so much fun. So just spending time with them, and again, we do a lot together, whether it be going to the beach or hiking or just hanging out. We spend a lot of time together.
Oh, terrific. All right. Thank you, Phil. This has been great. I think our members, we all are going to I'm going to look forward to working with you, and our members to working with you. It'll be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Disclaimer. The purpose of this podcast, brought to you by the California Association of Realtors, C.A.R., is to provide general and educational information and opinions from a wide range of perspectives regarding politics, voting, elections, legislative issues, and more. The opinions, beliefs, and views expressed by guests or participants of this podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, or views of C.A.R., its affiliates, their respective directors, officers, or employees. Reference to any individual or entity does not constitute an endorsement, recommendation, or any other position or opinion regarding that entity or individual by C.A.R. This podcast does not constitute professional advice or services of any kind. This podcast is available for private, non-commercial use only. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute this podcast.